We are here today to talk about the state of cringe.
Attitudes outside of his contact with the motorist.
This has been a topic that I've seen a lot online over the last few months, and I'm deeply fascinated as a writer that studies culture, as someone that's interested in the utilities of social media, social culture. And I'm interested in modes of behavior that influence us to police each other, to police ourselves. And so this is going to be an exploration of the recent kind of discussions about Gen Z culture, cringe, the loss of third spaces, and so much more. So we're going to run through a couple of things. Definitely consider myself a millennial. I lived in New York a few years ago, and I had a lot of friends that were a few years younger than me. That was kind of the first time in my life post-college where I really got to meet Gen Z and whether or not they're social and they don't want to fuck and they don't want to date. It's just, I don't mean to laugh, but sometimes I'm just like, this is a lot. Especially for a generation that came of age through the lockdown, through the pandemic. And so there's a lot of things to talk about and unpack. But before we get into even talking about what cringe is, the dichotomies of how people define cringe is also interesting. It's both simultaneously about being too authentic and not authentic enough. So it becomes kind of this oxymoron. How does being afraid of cringe help us or hold us back? And what can be learned when we liberate ourselves from our fear of it?
Cringe. That is when you feel extremely awkward and uncomfortable towards a situation. Secondhand shame. Now you know the meaning of the word cringe.
Well, one time one of the girls had a sandwich and she was like, I'm about to devour my sandwich. She was like that, like, you know, and like sometimes, and they like no one was mean to them in class, right? But like one time I asked one of them to borrow a pencil because I actually did lose mine, and she like just looked at me and started going like that and barking at me, even though she was wearing a squirrel tail. So yes, I just want people to know, like, all of the weird mannerisms that you see, like the girl in the IHOP doing the dance, that literally is the anime kids.
So according to the Webster's dictionary, cringe is defined as to recoil in distaste, to shrink in fear or servility, to behave in an excessively humble or servile way, or to draw in or contract one's muscles involuntarily, which I didn't know that was cringe. We cringed under the blasting wind. And then according to Urban Dictionary, when someone acts or is so embarrassing or awkward, it makes you feel extremely ashamed or embarrassed. Hey, that guy over there is cringe. Are you kidding, Francis? Is the definition of cringe. And I find cringe to be useful, interesting. Maybe there's something useful in this. But I also think about like how cringe essentially is a much lighter form of saying that something is taboo. Like, could being gay be cringe if you're a homophobe? Could being an immigrant be cringe if you're and I know I'm blowing this out into other kind of socio-political realms that have more damage to them. But I just think the notion of saying like, oh, that's so cringe, like, is being racist cringe, or is cringe just allocated for behaviors that are way less harmful, but they're considered embarrassing or awkward? Like, I think that distinction is interesting because I'm like, why can't younger folks be saying, oh, that's fascist, instead of saying it's cringe? Do you get what I'm saying? So to dig more into what the Panopticon is, there is an article titled Foucault and Social Media, Life in a Virtual Panopticon. This piece goes on to describe the Panopticon, which is essentially the structure that was designed in prisons to hyperextend the ability of COs and guards to survey. So this article reads, understood how being constantly visible co-understood how being made constantly visible impacts on us psychologically. Foucault was fascinated by Jerry Bentham's model of the ideal prison, the Panopticon, which has been incorporated in the architecture of prisons, schools, hospitals, workplaces, and urban spaces since Bentham designed it in the 18th century. In Bentham's design, the Panopticon is comprised of a ring of cells surrounding a central guard tower. The prisoners in the cells are perpetually exposed to the gaze of the guards in the tower, yet since they cannot themselves see into the tower, they are never certain whether or not they are being watched. Bentham's Panopticon, Foucault argues, functions to make prisoners take responsibility for regulating their behavior. Assuming that they care about the implications of bad behavior, prisoners will act in the manner prescribed by the institutions at all times on the chance that they are being watched. In time, as the sense of being watched gets under their skin, prisoners come to regulate their behavior as if they were in a panopticon at all times, even after they have been released from the institution. This, Foucault claims, is the major effect of the panopticon, to induce in the inmate a state of conscious and permanent visibility that assures the automatic functioning of power. And this goes on to state that conscious and permanent visibility Apparently, this is what Mark Zuckerberg thinks social media is all about. By making our actions and shares visible to a crowd, social media exposes us to a kind of virtual panopticon. This is not just because our activities are monitored and recorded by the social media service for the purposes of producing market analysis or generating targeted advertising. For the most part, we can and do ignore this kind of data harvesting. The surveillance that directly affects us and impacts us on our behavior comes from the people with whom we share. There are no guards and no prisoners in Facebook's virtual panopticon. We are both guards and prisoners, watching and implicitly judging one another as we share content. And to put it lightly, I find this to be such a vital and useful way to look at and engage with social media. Granted, for me as someone that posts a lot online, I try to set certain boundaries, but even in the past 6 or so months, I've realized okay, I use media to fill my time. And lately I've been trying to do more things outside, go swimming, go on walks. But on some level, posting all this stuff, reading through the comments sometimes, people are projecting their ideas onto me. You need to have boundaries, due diligence. Peace argues it establishes a mode of internal and external policing. If someone accuses you of being cringe, is that the same as being toxic or as being socially awkward or someone that doesn't understand boundaries? Or are you someone that doesn't fit into the social norms of a particular space? And if something is considered cringe in one space and not in another, which version of cringe do you factor into you policing yourself and which do you not? A conversation I had yesterday with someone at the artist residency I'm at, and they talked about how in the 80s and 90s, punk culture definitely demanded a certain kind of authenticity that's a bit different than how he views aspects of punk culture today, because so many younger folks are learning about punk culture and mosh pits and other things through the internet. And so even the orchestrated nature of the mosh, this person was saying, I saw younger folks in that mosh crowd almost choreograph subconsciously with other people instead of the crazy, chaotic punch in the face and you have a broken nose of the mosh pits of the 80s and 90s, and how he both views contemporary punk culture as being more diverse, but also being more tied to a kind of performance because of the way that more and more young people are coming to it. And I find this to be fascinating, how people are coming to culture, how that culture is being expressed, and then what boundaries are being drawn around these different stratifications of how people show up. Because I do think Gen Z and mass culture is arguing a kind of universal cringe, and then there is more subjective versions of cringe that are beholden to certain different social groups. I think a lot about this discussion around cringe in relation to Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde is a famous Black feminist writer, and she published an essay a number of years ago titled "Turning Silence into Language and Action." This is an essay that I think is a great counterpiece to this whole conversation around cringe. Essentially, this essay opens with Audre Lorde talking about waiting for a diagnosis related to what I believe might have been cancer, and the time in which she was waiting for a diagnosis and how this brought her into a certain kind of awareness. In becoming forcibly and essentially aware of my own mortality and of what I wished and wanted for in my life, however short it might be, priorities and omissions became strongly etched in a merciless light. And what I most regretted were my silences. Of what had I ever been afraid? To question or to speak as I believed I would have meant pain or death. But we all hurt in so many different ways all the time, and pain will either change or end. Death, on the other hand, is the final silence, and that might be coming quickly now without regard for whether I had spoken what needed to be said, only betrayed myself in small silences while I planned someday to speak, or waited for someone else's words. And I began to recognize a source of power within myself that comes from the knowledge that while it is most desirable not to be afraid, learning to put fear into perspective gave me great strength. I was going to die, if not sooner than later, whether or not I'd ever spoken myself. My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I had ever made to speak those truths from which I am still seeking, I had made contact with other women, the words to fit a world in which we all believed, bridging our differences. And it was the concern and caring of all these women which gave me the strength and enabled me to scrutinize the essentials of my living. It's such a powerful anecdote to a lot of the things that I think so much of our culture is dealing with. the ways that social media and the panopticon of social media compels us to police ourselves, to silence ourselves, to manipulate and shift our language into a kind of constant performance or branding or marketing. Cringe is sort of tied to this demand in contemporary social media culture that we always make ourselves marketable, that we always make ourselves presentable, that we always make ourselves...
You cute kids. You can have our 90s fashion. Take it. It's kind of epic. But you'll never understand.
You buy those cheese graters?
You can buy those cheese graters.
Can I get one?
Yes, you can.
Does it come with cheese?
How embracing cringe is central to my development. I remember getting our first desktop in our house. Honestly, I feel like I was 6 or 7, so that must have been around 2001, 2002. I remember logging on the computer, going on Nickelodeon.com, going on CartoonNetwork.com, playing Kim Possible, playing the Lilo and Stitch sandwich stacking game, playing so many games, and then when I entered, it was different then because we didn't have smartphones yet. So even if I did have a cell phone by like 10th or 11th grade, you could play the Snake game on it, you could save your contacts in it, but it wasn't like you could surf the internet. Internet and social media culture really shifted and changed for me in beginning of high school, because that's when I remember MySpace became really big. It was such a big thing to like design your MySpace page and pick your favorite song, and you have your top 5 friends, and if someone shifts their top 5 friends after there's drama at school, it's like, oh my God, there's drama on the MySpace. And then it was such an era of being so invested in these new forms of social media technology and engaging with it earnestly, if not with, of course, the mess that every generation has, because I was 14 on MySpace. You're supposed to be 18 or above. There were so many key moments where I started to understand the power of social media. I remember when the whole Chris Brown, Rihanna domestic violence debacle came out and the images came out of Rihanna. And I remember it was such a topic of conversation. Like people were messaging about it on MySpace and people were debating in my class. And this was because both it was all over like pop culture news and also online. Growing up, social media as a queer person in all these environments where I didn't feel safe, it became like haven, this escape. But it was escape towards like a sort of digital third space, meaning I was big on fan fiction websites and teen writing websites. If you want to talk about fucking cringe, look at all the smut and fan fiction and disgusting fiction online. Like, I wouldn't even name all the taboos that I was reading and writing about, but it's like werewolves and domestic violence, and I was adopted by a foster family, and like the girl's in love with her 8 brothers or whatever. I was on Tumblr. Tumblr was, I'm depressed and diving into suicide ideation, horrible poetry, all kinds of poetry, the dramatic straight hair with the side bang and the heavy makeup and the swag era and the emo era. I was deep into Tumblr. And if you were into Tumblr, it's like you're vomiting up every single thing you could ever think of. And it's like literally your online diary in a way that I think social media today mimics, but it's a little bit different. The inherent cringiness of a lot of the earlier forms of internet social media communication taught a lot of millennials to embrace their cringe, for better or for worse. Sadism of early YouTube, how there was way less copyright infringement and there was a lot less like checking of videos. You could find all kinds of weird, intense shit on early YouTube. And I remember early YouTube, like we had, and I think a part of early internet culture and cringe was the fact that we had far less accessibility to technology compared to today, even though there was a lot of accessibility. And that lack of accessibility made it so that you had to present more on camera. The early internet and not being afraid of cringe really taught me to believe in these inner worlds that I had, meaning I started getting into writing when I was 12 and I became obsessed. I started writing for the school newspaper. I started writing short stories. And I remember I would share my short stories with my classmates and they would be like, oh my gosh, like send me the next one. And oh my gosh, like this is so cool. And I remember my classmates being excited about it, but simultaneously at the time, I had a best friend who was fucking horrible in middle school. And I remember he thought me writing stories was cringy. I remember he read one of my short stories, laughed at it, and tore it up in front of me and told me to never write again. My personal investment into writing, the love I had for it, the amount of passion I had for it, to the point where it didn't really matter if people thought my writing was good or bad. Like, yes, I cared if it had an impact on people, but I more cared about the practice, the imagination, the idea that you could sit down and write a whole story, and by the end, you've created this whole new world. I think about the fact that if I had cared about being cringy when I was starting writing, I wouldn't have spent the hundreds of hours writing short stories, writing fan fiction, being on Meeba.com, Wattpad.com. So much of early internet creative sharing culture, especially if I think of writing communities like Teen Ink, was about celebrating the fact that people were doing it and the fact that if you put out enough, you would be able to find an audience. And granted, there were still the hierarchies of the internet. Certain things were valued more than others, but the discussion boards and the forums where people are sharing advice and information and talking, it cultivated a community where you didn't need to be great at something. You just needed to be passionate enough to show up. And that was something that really helped solidify my understanding. And the lesson I learned from this, as I'll say again, is caring enough about something that you don't care that you're bad at it. And if I look at contemporary social media culture or the conversations I've had with friends who are professors or teachers at university, even last week I was talking to my friend who's a teacher in Ohio, and they talked about how they teach at an arts high school and how they have students that love writing, that really want to like learn and engage, but as these students are entering, deciding what they want to do for university, a lot of them are choosing more stable majors or career fields to study. This teacher will ask them like, hey, why aren't more of you like considering studying writing or whatever? And a lot of them will say, A, writing doesn't make money. Like, how am I going to do it? And two, it's cringe to write about yourself, to fixate on yourself, to make art about yourself. And I think this point is interesting because I do follow a few like artist YouTubers, one in particular that I follow who just moved to New York. And it's interesting. Like, I watch this person's videos and their art is amazing. It's amazing visual art and paintings. They're talking about how the self-analyzing nature of their art feels a bit cringy because it isn't addressing the issues in the world around us. And I find this distinction to be interesting and necessary and good to think about. I understand that my art is politically driven and it's invested in the social systems around me, but that's also because I became a writer and then also became radicalized. My art is tied to a racial and historical and political lineage. Branding and content creation and art are all kind of seemingly synonymous, or can be. That nature of trying to commodify it or make it a brand and present it online, how seemingly for younger folks, there's a part of that isn't enough anymore, that feels cringy. Art, the motivation behind it, how social media has changed a lot of our motivation behind what we practice, how we practice it, how we perform it, market it to the public. Because I think about like when I was writing, like, yeah, I was posting online, but there weren't really platforms promote it cross-platform. Posted your writing on Meeba or Wattpad. It wasn't really a thing to cross-platform promote it. The nature of internet at that time turned away from branding and more towards act of doing something and having it be beholden to a certain platform where other people were passionate about that thing, as opposed to now where I think we have these key social media platforms where everything is there and everything is up for debate, discussion, the accusation of being cringe, etc. So all of those things are kind of fascinating to me in terms of how we express ourselves online and what is policed in terms of the internet commons, which I guess we can consider short form and long form platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. We also had so many cringy trends, but they were around to stay. They were here for longer. So our engagement with it was maybe a bit deeper compared to the sort of ephemerality of contemporary trends and micro trends. With social media now, since we have so many conceptions of virality, we feel that our content is much more cringier much sooner because we aren't hitting the marks or milestones that so much of the content creation niche and all the advice and post 1 time a day. There's a gamification of the internet and social media now in a way that makes more things cringe, if that makes sense. How being afraid of cringe is holding you back. And so first is this article titled Gen Z is falling in love with the charm and cringe of millennials. Across TikTok, thousands of people have posted videos romanticizing things that are typically associated with millennial culture. And this article says, not too long ago, if you asked Derek Dench, 22, to describe millennials, the Gen Z term chuggy, outdated or uncool, may have come to mind. But in recent months, the Brooklyn resident has said he's been overcome by a different emotion when thinking about the generation that came before him. Nostalgia. The millennial era of BuzzFeed quizzes and mustaches, nerd nerdcore, hipsters, very much like Delightfully Cringe, but in a wholesome way, said Denge, whose video about his love of millennial culture on TikTok has been viewed thousands of times. Many Gen Zers, typically defined as those ages 12 to 27, have expressed similar feelings of longing for the era they never got to experience as adults. Hundreds of people have posted videos celebrating things that are typically associated with millennial culture, including Tumblr, skinny jeans, upbeat music, Barack Obama, and the TV show Girls. In taking comfort in millennial culture, Gen Zers are sort of looking back at a time when, you know, it's perceived that things were more stable, Aronson said. Christian Guarin, 22, described the 2010s as a more hopeful time, which he partially attributed to the country electing and re-electing its first black president. It is interesting how contemporary Gen Z culture, according to this article, is looking at the 2010s as this more hopeful expression. But when I look back, I'm like, oh, we were living through this new version of neoliberalism that we're now living through the consequences of, which also contributed to some of the social and political conditions that have led to the social isolation and lack of third spaces of today. Like, think about globalization, think about fucking small businesses not having what they need to establish themselves as a stronghold in communities. And so there's a loss of third spaces. I think about early and contemporary social media has been allowed to run rampant, leading to the disinformation politics of today. And so it's interesting how contemporary youth culture is looking back and feeling nostalgic. And I think some of that is because the buying into this post-racial America or this more hopeful America really did allow for people to kind of feel like they could participate or that they weren't going to be punished for participating. So in other ways, cringe is kind of doing too much. It's being too earnest. It's centering yourself, being too passionate, being too political, being too much. But I ask, but if being too much is cringe, should we just expect to be too much for everyone or just those who don't appreciate us? And this brings me to like a few last central truths that I want to kind of dig into. Truth one that I kind of see and believe in this whole discussion of cringe. Being afraid of cringe is another form of perfectionism. When I really analyze this through the tenets of white supremacy and how perfectionism is one of those tenets, I think about how cringe could be weaponized in order to tell certain kinds of bodies or people that you're not acting like the normal. You need to have the clean girl energy. And like, black skin is clean, but is it clean in the way that the internet wants it to be? You know what I'm saying? Being perfectionists can sometimes mean that we don't even start the process of chasing our dreams, our passions, the things we're most curious about, for fear of being judged or being considered too passionate. Perfectionism, I think, in contemporary culture either demands that we be an expert or like totally knowing of it or having this huge frame of reference, or it turns towards doing things in a way that leans into performance, because our lack of engagement means that it's less likely that we're going to be judged because we can present it in a way that seems authentic and real, but it's actually just like, I bought a journal, I'm TikToking myself and calling myself a journaler, and I haven't even journaled for more than like 3 days. I think of that level of perfectionism, either perfecting the skills that we're presenting in terms of a certain kind of hobby or brand or niche, or performing those skills, and either of those being a way to avoid cringe because you're leaning into a certain kind of perfectionism, either through the actual act of being skilled in something or in pretending to be skilled. Is cringe also a byproduct of being unable to name and live with contradiction? And I don't really know if I have a full answer to this question. I just think it's interesting because when I think about the early internet, I do think there were a lot of contradictions that people were willing to live with and maybe engage with. And now with some of the internet culture to live with contradiction and inability to be both cool and uncool, and inability to be like crashing out and also like mindful and self-conscious, and I meditate and journal. And I don't know if this is a fully formed thought, but if you're watching this, let me know if what I'm saying kind of makes sense. To end this video, I think about the underlying lesson. As a radical, as a queer person, as someone who's invested in art and critical thinking, it's the notion that
I can't describe to anyone who's been there knows what I did. And anyone who hasn't been, I cannot tell. No. I don't know what I did. I got through one day to the next. No, 4 years. How I did it, I don't know.
Now, when you were starting out as a writer, you were a black, impoverished homosexual. You must have said to yourself, gee, how disadvantaged can I get?
Oh, no, I thought I hit the jackpot.
Oh, great.
If it's so outrageous, you could not go any further, you know. So you had to find a way to use it.
Queerness and subversion taught me the value of evaluating myself for myself. If I believed in the fact that queer or homosexual was taboo to the point that you should never do it or never even engage in it, I would have believed in the tabooness and cringe that people applied to this thing. If I believed people growing up when they said, being an artist doesn't make you any money, you're going to be unhappy, you need money, you need to go to college, who gives a fuck about debt? I wouldn't be living the life that I am now, traveling, going to artist residencies, critically thinking and engaging in politics, engaging in the world around me, living out my version of my life in a way that suits me and is also cares about community. The ability to evaluate yourself for yourself is when you begin to liberate yourself. And this doesn't mean that you don't have any social responsibility or you don't care about community, but it does mean that you don't measure the judgments of others far beyond how you judge or look or analyze yourself. The mass social ways that we view culture and cringiness and being too much or not being enough, I also view that as a mode of policing that should be fact-checked and critically thought about and pushed back against, because the more we consider passion and earnestness and honest self-expression, as long as it's tied to consciousness, as long as we consider that cringe, it's sort of just like an unconscious way of policing each other and saying what's cool and what's not cool. And to me, what's really cool is being your authentic self, being passionate enough to show up and to tell people who you are, to defend yourself, to be real about the things that you believe in, and to face the consequences or to learn from those consequences. And if people won't, and especially this is like if people won't experience your success, I think so much of analyzing things as cringe or labeling them as cringe is this idea that we all need to have a shared social behavior because our success is tied to parasocial adoration of other people. Cringiness, I think, matters so much today because we're building so much of our online lives by seeking the approval or the following or the adoration of others. And granted, this isn't the only way that people build platforms online or build brands or build an audience, but it does become this kind of contradiction where we're analyzing things as cringe, we're considering them taboo or chuggy, but it's partially because we've opened up more and more of our lives to online consumption. We've opened up more of our private lives. The more we open up ourselves to internet judgment, even though we all kind of set parameters around what we do or don't say online, the more we're giving people permission, in a sense, to judge the things that we're expressing. And there's a careful line, I think, across niches and platforms and the different areas of the internet. All of this kind of makes me think about the state of cringe, the state of our government, and how more and more people are going into debt or can't afford the cost of living. All of these things push people into various forms of escapism or to not investing in a future that can be collective. Or maybe it does, but I do think it creates an interesting situation where if the real world isn't offering us what we want, whether socially or politically, we go to the internet and it becomes a place where we then become policed in a way that is almost similar to the modes of policing that we're seeing our government do. Our government is considering being trans cringy. Our government is considering being undocumented cringy. And granted, I'm blowing things out of proportion, but I guess I'm relating the internalized and externalized modes of policing that the internet kind of teaches us and how it kind of mimics the logic of the state. And how we're experiencing this state level panopticon, and on a social level, we're experiencing a panopticon as well. I kind of beg the question of, if we're policing ourselves on a social level and we exist under fascism, where is the realm of socio-political reality where we can actually be honest, where we can actually be earnest, where we can make mistakes, where we can hold each other accountable outside of the spectacle of public performance and public accountability? So I hope this video gives you a lot to chew on. It's been something I've been thinking about. If you want to get more videos kind of digging into the socio-political kind of understandings about internet culture and how we approach it, let me know. Let me know what you think about the things that I shared in this video. Do you think this whole cringiness kind of analysis of culture is going to be here to stay? Is it fading? Do we think that younger and younger generations are going to fight for more physical third spaces? Or is the fight to create a more digital commons alongside a physical commons? And how does that become possible? Is it Web 3.0? Is it something else? And I really want to end this video by saying, on some level, certain forms of cringe is the cost of becoming your true self. If I hadn't written all that horrible fiction when I was a teenager, written numerous novels in high school obsessively, I wouldn't have had the strength to study what I did in college. I hadn't uploaded on YouTube damn near 14 years ago some crappy skits and other things. I wouldn't have laid the foundation of crappy video editing, crappy audio editing. Even though my editing isn't perfect now, I wouldn't have laid the foundation to begin building the skills that have brought me to being the YouTuber, media maker, artist that I am now. And so the cost of cringe is that you invest enough into your personal and internal world that the future you that has so many dreams and ideas and hopes for your life outside of the realm of what other people want for you, you invest in that and it becomes a possibility that is beyond any kind of benefit that abiding by the politics of cringe could ever bring you. And this isn't to say that people should say whatever they want and there's no social accountability. I believe that should exist, but I don't believe that people should police other people for engaging in their own lives consciously and finding things that they're passionate about and being earnest. So thank you for watching another video on this channel. Let me know what you think about this whole discussion about cringe and Gen Z culture and the loneliness epidemic. Does it feel very real to you, or does it feel very ephemeral and it doesn't really affect you? Have you confronted cringe in your own life? Or do you feel like you've overcome it and you've now reached a newer place where you feel like you can be more honest, whether online or offline? But once again, thank you for watching this video. If you want to support me in this channel, like, comment, and subscribe, hit the notify button. I'm going to be posting more on my Patreon of different residency diaries of me just reflecting on my time at this artist residency. I'm only 2 days in, so I have a lot of time here and I'm going to be making a lot of videos. I don't know when this is going to be able to upload.